Hi, this is Anthony, parent of Iris Medic, and today we have a special guest. We have Kathleen Dameron joining us from Paris, France, as you can tell. It is her birthday today, and she is celebrating with a glass of wine and the topic of
No,
a
a
glass of
glass of
champagne. Ah,
champagne.
a glass of champagne. A
Champagne.
nearly empty glass of champagne that she may have to go to refill. She wants to talk about something very near and dear to her heart, and we're being a little sarcastic, and that's the U.S. tax system, because Kathleen has a heck of a story that's going on. And I think it really affects everybody because this is sort of what the result of the US tax system is. So, Kathleen, you were born in the United States of America, correct?
I was born in East St. Louis, Illinois, in the heart of the United States.
So, you're about as American as they come, correct?
I am very American, yes.
And now you're
And
not living in America now. I could see that with something in the background that doesn't look very
you can see
American.
something in the background that says I'm not living in the States. And, I think they call me an expat.
Hmm.
I've been an expat for a long time. At the same time, I'm one of those rare Americans. I almost said crazy, but no, but I'm one of those rare Americans that even though I live abroad, I'm very engaged in the US political system. And not for this election because of COVID, of course, but for three preceding elections, I actually went to the United States for the presidential elections, and I went to swing states, and I went to register people to vote. I registered people to vote in Missouri. I registered people to vote in Florida. I was on the ground. And so I have a real commitment to this democratic process where you get everybody to go out to vote and say how they feel and what they think and what's the government they want to have. So the US tax process is actually that shock because what it proposes to do, which is to stop American people living in the United States from having fraud abroad, it actually makes it impossible to be a US citizen living abroad and have a life. And there are a couple of areas where it was difficult, and now it has become impossible.
And I think the word here is impossible. As we sort of explore Kathleen's story a little bit more, we're gonna see that. And here's the point that I love about her story, because here's the problem that I think that we have, and sort of this is just not for expats, but the tax code affects a minority of people very poorly, and they don't have the political clout to say, "Hey, look, this is nuts. What's going on?" Now, with expats, the sympathy gets somewhat limited. It's very difficult to get politicians. It's very to get fellow Americans very all that concerned with the taxation of how expatriates are treated. Hey, these are people who left the United States, and if they want to go overseas, you know what? That's their problem. But here we have a great American, right? Kathleen, you love the United States of America. You volunteer at great expense and great cost to yourself to assist the United States in its role of self-government, though. So we can't say you're sort of one of these persons who said, "Bye, US. Who cares about you?" You did not do that at all, did you?
No.
No.
And, you know, I left the United States when I was 18 years old, and I came to university in France, the junior year abroad. I love Paris. I fell in love with the city. And I stayed in Paris long enough at 18 to fall in love with the Frenchman. So it's kind of like, that's what you kind of do between 18
Right.
and 22 years old. You fall in love and set
Right.
up with somebody. So I've stayed in France. I've stayed in Paris, which is a beautiful city. And I studied cultural anthropology. My core competency is how to help people work between cultures. I speak French, I speak Spanish, I speak German, I learned to speak Japanese. And so I work on cultures and how do you get people to work together. I've done a lot of work in French companies and how do they work with the mother company, which is American. And I work with American companies that will work around the world. So that is what I do. Cross-cultural competency. How do you work across cultures? How do you understand other people? And Paris is a perfect place to be to do that. And it's very funny because I'm often seen as the American, I'm one of the few Americans who speaks foreign languages, and I help people understand Americans.
So now,
I
why
do
don't
not
we
understand the American tax code. I do not understand how they can say it's great and it's wonderful to be an entrepreneur, to have your own business, to make money, you save for your retirement. But the US tax code for expats makes it impossible to have a business in another country, and it makes it detrimental to having a retirement. I mean, if you follow what they say, you cannot save to retire, which means you're going to have to work to the end of your life because you couldn't save the money. And if you save the money, they take it from you.
Well,
So
that
it doesn't make
can't
sense. I'll stop
possibly
there.
that can't possibly be true whatsoever, right? There's no way. But John, is there any merit to what Kathleen is saying here? Is it possible that it's impossible to have a retirement overseas? If you're, I mean, this has got to be overinflated. This just can't be correct. That your life can't. It's got to be an exaggeration. People are just being dramatic, right? It's too much champagne, right? It can't be that nuts, is it?
It's far worse than she's describing. What she has basically left out are all the confiscatory. I mean, what she's describing is just ongoing taxation rules that make it impossible to save, accumulate income, that sort of thing. But what she's left out, and why she's understating the situation, in fact, is all the confiscatory things that have been going on. For example, the transition tax, the PFIC regime, the exit tax rule, should she possibly attempt to renounce. You just can't make this stuff up. And it's amazing that here we have a patriotic American from the heart of the homeland in America, East St. Louis, Missouri, who is simply trying to live her life in Paris according to what purport to be American values: entrepreneurship, running an own business, self-reliance, saving for retirement. But the simple fact of the matter, Anthony, is that basically Americans abroad have no business whatsoever being in business.
And it's unfortunately it's very true, and it's surprising for a lot of people. It's actually situations where there is no real great way to handle some cases. Now, some cases are easy to handle, but
But
and one thing that we've noticed, and this is really the problem that we say as an American, we are supposed to have that number one passport in the world. I am sorry, but I was taught to believe that U.S. passport, man, that was the gold standard. That gave you the right as an American. Hey, man, we fought the big ones. We fought all the big wars, and maybe we won them. Maybe we did. But boy, when you look at the fact that an American cannot own a business overseas unless they happen to be rich already beyond belief and can structure things in a certain way, you start to think, this whole belief that we believe that this American passport is the most valuable passport in the world is a crock. It's a total crock. It is not the most valuable passport in the world.
It is the most expensive. It is the most expensive passport, because once you have a U.S. passport, you are either an American citizen sent abroad to work by an American company, and then you're okay because they pay you a salary and your retirement is in the United States. But if you set up your own business, the American tax structure asks you to redeclare on an American tax form what you've already declared in the country you're in. I'm in France. I declare the taxes on my business in France, and I pay those taxes in France. But then I have to pay a special tax lawyer to take my French tax form and put it on an American tax form. There are things that are obligatory. You have to pay them in France. You have no choice. And on the American tax form, they said, oh, sorry, you cannot deduct that in the United States because it doesn't exist in the United States. Social charge, what they call social charges, are obligatory in France, and they correspond to about 40 to 50% of what you make. You go to the U.S. form and they don't want to take that into account. So they're going to artificially inflate your income. So you've paid that obligatory charge in France. You have paid the taxes you owe in France. And in the beginning, they say to you, don't worry, because in the US, you will declare your taxes and you will deduct from what you owe in the United States what you have paid in France. And everybody knows that France, this semi-socialist country, has huge taxes and you would never have to worry. Well, in fact, they don't take into account what you obligatorily have to pay in France. So they inflate your income in the United States, and you find yourself having to pay to the Americans for money that you earned in France, that you pay taxes on in France. You owe them money because they don't take into account what is the cost of doing business. Now, a long time ago, when I studied economics and accounting, the cost of doing business was always something you could deduct.
Yes.
And so now something which is by the French government, a cost of doing business, the United States does not want you to deduct. They inflate your income and they want you to pay money for them. And that makes me really pissed off.
I think with
hence why this is Keith Redmond. Hence why it is a myth that one is not doubly taxed. Kathleen just gave a prime example.
It's not even double taxed. John can certainly get into the other types of confiscatory taxes that apply. This idea that that it is possible, and we get into these things where the courts have changed the definition of income to something that isn't income. So the IRS is allowed to charge an income tax on something that isn't income. You've taken away people's deductions. So you're saying, like, no, that's not their name. They're cheating and they're lying to say you've had income that you do, because it says the 16th Amendment says there shall be a tax levied on income. It doesn't say there shall be a tax levied on anything. It defines as an income. But you go through this, and John, I think you and I have gone through a bunch of stuff where things are so far removed from any sort of relationship to an income that somebody actually receives. Now, why is it, because the thing that I haven't heard why right now, though, is why is it impossible, or why is it so difficult for an American person overseas to own a business? John, what makes it so difficult in these cases? Specifically, what is so bad about it? Someone just wondering, like, you guys just got to be bitching because you are, but can you tell me some of the impossibilities that we're sort of given?
Well, basically, different tax systems operate differently, and many countries' tax systems, of which Canada would be an example, have tax incentive to use small business corporations to run businesses. In Canada, they're called Canadian-controlled private corporations, but many countries have equivalents. Or in Australia, for example, the use of trusts and things like that. But there are very, very draconian rules, both tax and reporting, that apply to that type of arrangement, or even if it's not a corporation, if it's a foreign partnership, et cetera. So the first point is that there's a reporting regime that is extremely punitive. It's very penalty laden, complicated, and expensive to comply with. And, those who don't comply with it are subject to, all kinds of penalties, which I understand at present are being automatically assessed, particularly in the case of the 5471. Now, it's interesting that people call it a form, and that's not true at all. In fact, it's a series of schedules that are sort of stapled together, and it's a more extensive disclosure than a tax return, for example, would be in Canada. And the reason for this is to accumulate the kind of information that is necessary to impose the punitive U.S. taxation on the U.S. citizen shareholders of those corporations, which, without getting into the complexities, is really designed to end the separation between the corporation and the shareholder, and to impose direct taxation on the shareholder with respect to income earned by the corporation, which the shareholder never received. So a recent example, in the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, for example, mutual funds, by the way, are also a problem, non-U.S. mutual funds. So I'll quote from a famous mutual fund ad, Templeton Growth Fund, used to market itself saying, proud of our past, confident of our future. Well, in 2017, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act contains provisions that apply to Americans abroad in small business, which basically punish them for their past and destroyed any possibility of being able to use those small business corporations in the future in the way that they were intended to align with the tax system in the country of residence. So it's a combination of an extremely complex reporting regime that people are, generally speaking, not going to be able to manage on them for themselves.
No way.
And I know, we don't need to get into what you would charge for 5471, Anthony, but I suspect it's well in excess of 5,000 just as a start.
Depends. Yeah, I mean, it depends.
That would be for a nothing.
Active corporations,
nothing
absolutely. Of real active corporations, they get way up there. And as Kathleen mentioned, when you have to convert from a so-called foreign jurisdiction's tax accounting to the U.S. to GAAP, everything has to be converted. Or the IRS says, "Oh, your form, you did it. That's nice. You spent 40."
Yeah. So
I'm not going to say it's complete. So, and we.
And I would add also that while we're on this topic, that one of the things listening to Kathleen talk about this is quite interesting to me. What she's really talking about are mismatches between the French tax system and the U.S. tax system. But what the U.S. has started to do, and the transitions, the things I just talked about in relation to tax cut and job, the transition tax and GILTI are good examples of this, is to actually create fake income events attributable to the U.S. shareholder. By the way, it's a tax resident, in her case, of France. And by doing that, impose a real tax on fake income before the country of residence can impose a real tax. And this is why there is no tax credit available to the U.S. citizen shareholder.
I didn't even get what you're saying until now. Wait a second. You're right, because this is what John's talking about. He's saying that a U.S. shareholder is taxed on the built-up equity of a corporation. Well, that taxpayer doesn't have it. It's like, well, that yes, your stock represents that equity in the corporation, but in order for you to exercise your equity, you would, you have to sell your stock, or you're going to do some sort of expensive thing if you can't sell it, trying to get your equity. Okay. So you actually don't have it. It represents your equity in it. But now the thing is the IRS is taxing you on the equity the corporation has. However, the corporation doesn't really have that equity that for themselves, because they still likely have to pay their foreign taxes on this amount that's sitting there. So the amount that the American is taxed on, not only is it an amount they're not receiving, the corporation really isn't getting that amount either, because they have yet to be taxed by their foreign. Is that what you're saying, John, basically?
Well, the foreign corporation may or may not have been taxed at the corporate level. But, just keeping it very simple, I mean, most individual U.S. citizens think in terms of tax credits, foreign tax credits to offset U.S. taxable income. So if you have a situation where the U.S. is imposing a tax where no tax is imposed by the country of residence, you have a U.S. tax owing, but no foreign tax credit to actually offset that. Now, I understand for those listening that, there are possibly complex workarounds in certain types of situations, the 962 election and that.
Yeah.
But the point is that the principle of the thing, all right, is to impose real taxation on fake income. By that, I mean income never actually received by the individual. And in so doing, it sets up a situation when the individual does receive that income in France, they'll have to pay, or Canada, they'll have to pay a separate tax again. So it really does set it up for double taxation. Now, again, for the tax geeks out there, yeah, I understand there are planning techniques, et cetera, to work around this. But Why in God's name should a proud American from the heartland of the homeland running a small business who can't afford this type of stuff be sucked in to this complex anti-deferral regime, which was aimed at large multinationals?
Totally right. The wrong people, right? Totally different.
Can I intervene here?
Absolutely.
If I were Google or Amazon, now Alphabet, the GAFAs, they pay zero. They pay zero. But I cannot afford to have a small business here because they're going to tax me out of being able to live.
That's
So I
exactly
closed
right.
my company.
Wait.
I closed my company.
Wait, you had to close your
I
company?
closed it because I could not afford to have a business and make a living. But if I were a GAFA, I could be tax-free in all of Europe. So the system is made to shaft small business expats.
Absolutely, yeah, that's the truth. Because as you get up in size, you can, because as businesses, if your foreign company gets up in size, you can handle the costs. But if you're not big enough, these costs are just way too much. Now, Kathleen, a good attorney never asks a question he doesn't know the answer to, but I don't know the answer to this one. So I have a question for you.
Yes.
How many people do you think you helped register to vote during your years of volunteering? How many people do you think have you talked to about politics and say, hey, let's get engaged over the years? How many would you say?
I mean, that is really hard to say because, we were registering like a couple hundred people to vote every day. I mean, that's what we were doing. I mean, and those were the registration forms we took in. So
tens of thousand people over the years certainly would not be an exaggeration, right?
No.
Okay, so now here comes the question I don't know the answer to, and I'm going to ask it anyway. Out of those tens of thousands of people that you've talked to register to vote, how many of them would you say voted for citizen-based taxation? That they said, Kathleen, what's really important to me? The issue for me.
But nobody asked them to vote on citizen-based taxation.
That's funny. You've talked to 10,000 people, yet nobody wants. But what do we got here? That's kind of so no one in the U.S. actually wants it because maybe they don't even know it exists.
Yeah, but it's the sort of thing that's when I start explaining to my family and to friends in the United States, citizen-based taxation. In the beginning they would just say, "No, Kathleen, this is not possible," and then you sort of send them the documents, and they're like, "This doesn't make sense." Right now, as I'm getting up in age and I have to think about retirement and the way the system is done, if I have money in a retirement account already, they don't even consider a retirement account outside the United States as a retirement account. So in France, when you put money in your retirement account, it's not taxable. When I put money in my French retirement account, the Americans consider that taxable because they don't recognize a French retirement account. But not only that, I got to the point where I was shifting from being dynamic to a tranquil profile, which is what you're supposed to do as you start getting older. And so inside my account, I did not take the money out. It's just inside we went from one profile to the next profile. So they sold stock and then they bought other stock. And I incurred a tax debt for transactions where I did not even get the money. And they want several $1,000s from me for money that I never touched. So where am I supposed to get this money? Oh, well, if I sell stock to have the money to pay them, they get 39% of what I sell to be able to pay the taxes for the money that I didn't touch. And this is ridiculous. This is absolutely ridiculous. Yeah. So I'm saying, wait a minute, this is impossible. This is impossible. So I'm explaining to my mother the situation. And my mother, who is 86 years old, is saying, Kathleen, you cannot sacrifice your life and your ability to support yourself with the U.S. tax system. And my mother says, okay, so if you have to renounce, because I want my daughter to be able to support herself. I want her to be able to have a living. I mean, my mother's 86 years old and she gets it. This is insane. No, it's not insane. I'm going to reformulate. This is a way of taxing Americans who live abroad as if we were people to punish, as if we were people to deny the right to benefit from what we worked for.
Yeah. May I add something to that?
And that is what makes it so infuriating.
Yeah. You know, although not quite stated this way, it's really interesting listening to Kathleen. I thank her for sharing all this. But I think it's important to make a point in a very simple sentence. The United States is imposing a separate and different kind of tax system on Americans abroad that homeland Americans are really not subject to at all. Point number one. Mm-hmm. And whether by accident or design, it really is designed to, one, ensure that they'll basically not be able to run a business, not be able to retire, et cetera, but it has evolved into something that, in my view, is now direct asset confiscation. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Things like the treatment of mutual funds, things like the transition tax, et cetera. And Kathleen, you know, I know that as a proud American, it's difficult for you to contemplate renunciation of U.S. citizenship. But given that this is the reality, okay, given that, you know, this has been on the radar, there's no question that this is now a well-known fact and that Congress is not doing anything about it, I really think that you ought to consider getting out of U.S. citizenship and renouncing it, you know, to save yourself.
And when you say that, like 2 years ago, I was like, no. But now, I mean, what they just did to me, I mean, like, I'm just doing what you're supposed to do to take care of yourself, to make sure that you have retirement, to make sure that you have money to live on your old age. I'm clean, I declare, I'm scrupulous, I go to a tax accountant that I pay. I'm like, you know, I'm one of those stupid, squeaky clean people, right?
Kathleen, they hate you for your freedoms.
And I'm like, oh my goodness. And then you sort of, from my point of view, start adding insult to injury, is that I closed my company. Okay, I'm not going to be an entrepreneur anymore. I go to work for a French company. I live in France. I go to work for a French company. And they have this thing called FBARs, FACTA.
Yeah, right.
And for every bank account that I have a signature on, I have to declare to the Americans the bank account, the address of the bank, and what was the maximum amount of money that you had on that bank account that year. Now, can you imagine that you're working for a company, a French company, and you, because you have signature on that account, you have to get all of the bank details and all of this to declare on a form. They don't want you to have signature on the account.
No.
So I could run a program, but not have signature on that program. Duh. And not only that, that was just in the corporate point of view. But let's look at it from a personal point of view. I was married to a Frenchman. Can imagine that you're in a marriage and you're going to explain to your spouse that the money that they make in their country has to be declared to the Americans because you have signature on the account. I'm a professional woman. I separated all my accounts from my husband. I have no signature on any accounts that he had. But imagine that you didn't work. Yeah. Imagine that you're a woman who stays at home and takes care of the kids. And all of a sudden, either you have to violate your husband and have him declare in his country, his taxes, his his bank account numbers, the addresses of the bank, and what's the maximum amount of money that went through that year, which, let me tell you, they do not appreciate it all. It creates humongous stress in marriages. But if you're a woman who is not working and you no longer have signature on any account, you have just put yourself in a fragility, a vulnerability, a lack of income security that is, you could burn out.
There's no way this would pass muster in the United States. There's no way.
Not at all.
You're in a situation where you're forcing American women spouses to become victims, prey.
Right. They have to subject themselves, and if they don't like the deal, TS. You're taking away people's fundamental rights so easily without it. And this is the thing. There's a brutal indifference to it because no one at the IRS really cares all that much about it because they don't even know what it is. So it's this law that's on the books that nobody actually likes all that much or truly appreciates or understands. And it's for what? And as we go through the amount of revenue that the IRS collects from from people overseas, it's not worth the hassle. It's certainly not worth the hassle for everything that they do and the misery that they permeate. And our issue is just the brutal indifference that we get from fellow Americans. And I would say that the fellow Americans who don't see that the fact is that you are a second, third class citizen because of the tax system, that you think this world is your oyster. No, it is not. No, it is not. Do not go overseas and fall in love because you'll have problems. That's not for you. You stay in the US.
The only way you can go overseas is if you work for an American company. Because if you work for a foreign company, you're going to immediately have this problem.
Yeah. The general principle here that I think needs to be understood, we can go on and on with example after example. But the way the U.S. tax code is set up, and this is generally, I think, reinforced by U.S. culture, is that any attempt to leave the United States for any reason is probably motivated by tax evasion. And any interaction with any foreign investment product, basically the same thing. If you read the Internal Revenue Code, once you see the word foreign, you can be sure the word penalty is sure to follow, probably starting at $10,000. But Kathleen, you've got to understand that you married a French citizen, you married a non-American.
I married an alien. An
alien. Yeah, absolutely. You marry a non-American is an alien. Okay, there are good ones and bad ones. Good ones are resident aliens. Bad ones are non-resident aliens. But the point is that the combined effect of a number of the principles of the tax code and the reporting requirement is that, in effect, marriage to an alien is a form of tax evasion. Okay, you could have come back to America to have found a spouse, but you chose not to.
I'm sure there was someone good in St. Louis. You'd probably just, really.
Did you not realize what you were doing?
There's millions of available guys in America. What were you doing?
No.
Geez, you're following your heart.
I was just consuming local. I was consuming in the environment that I was in.
You're doing what people should do, right? You're doing what you hope you could do, what you want your kids
to do.
Not
American.
Can you imagine how horrible it must be when you have two Americans living abroad who get married? Then they're really, really, really in trouble.
Well, they're in the same crappy boat together, I guess, is sort of at least.
At least I have someone. This is his home.
Yeah, right. And it does absolutely create some strain in this. Now we've gone over.
That's an understatement.
Yeah, right. There's right.
I'm saying that is an understatement.
Yeah, it creates strain in marriages throughout the world, and and I've talked to couples, and it's really, really awful. And
I have talked to couples where they divorced over it. No lie. Seriously, they have divorced over it.
I know.
Yeah, or renounced citizenship. I've seen countless examples of the American renouncing U.S. citizenship precisely because of the strain that it's putting on the marriage. There's no doubt about that. Yeah, no, but you know, on the renunciation, I mean, you know, they're opening themselves up to the whole exit tax issue as well.
And there's
Yeah, I
ways-
mean, the exit tax issue is mind blowing. So they do everything they can to push you for economic survival to renounce, and then boom, they charge you a large amount of money to open a file
right.
to renounce.
Right.
And then they decide, oh, you're leaving, but by the way, pay before you go. I go, wait a minute.
Which I think brings us to one of our final points about this. And one of the things that's been going on for years is the IRS has been, international compliance has been a focus of the IRS since 2009, since the first offshore voluntary disclosure initiative that was sprung through, you know, somebody who was evading taxes through the UBS. They were smuggling diamonds, and it's sort of a whole plan unraveled. So it's been a big focus of the IRS because the IRS has seen there's some big penalties that they can assess against people who are scared to death, and well, they have the money to pay because the account is there. They can do it some way or another. So over the years, the IRS has frightened the heck out of people, and they even went as far to say, oh, we've identified people who've disclosed, but they didn't do it our right way. There's 10,000 of them, and we're going to come after them so hard where they're not going to be able to sit straight. All these people with undeclared accounts, we were going to come after you so hard, there's no way to possibly escape us. You better come clean or else. Well, the thing that we find out is the IRS is full of it. They're completely full of it. Their bark is nothing. They haven't been auditing anybody. Their claim that they were going to come after people who didn't do the right thing is nonsense. It's not there.
Yeah.
The IRS will not audit. Their audit rate for international returns is obscenely low. And the reason that they give is because they're too complicated. They're too complicated for the IRS to do, but boy, taxpayer, you got to do it. So there's some real incredible absurdity through of this. That really, I mean, it goes way too far of whatever could be acceptable in our world. So this is what we're stuck with, this nasty little thing here where there isn't great ways out for people, and there's a tremendous amount of ignorance and indifference. If they're not ignorant, they're indifferent. And if you call the IRS right now, give a number one of those calls. Tell them what you should, you know, like where you should put ask them a question about if your foreign pension is taxable. I would say 90% of the people would say, well, it's not taxable. You don't live in the US. And this is IRS employees. IRS employees themselves don't know about citizenship-based taxation. We have IRS employees as clients. We have diplomats as clients. I mean, no one knows. It's all hidden in there, and it's all these vicious traps that are there. Now, Keith, what would you like to add here? What would you say is sort of the take home, and why did we do? I mean, this is the reason why I want to do this video. Is I wanted to put a personal face for all those people out there to say it doesn't matter. These are just people evading taxes and doing whatever they do. We got to crack down on them, and that's what we hear, and it's so obnoxious when we hear people saying they're evading taxes. Why? That's nonsense, and you have no justification for saying that. It makes me suspicious of anyone claiming someone's evading taxes. I'm kind of wondering about them, to tell you the truth. So, Keith, what is our point here? What are we trying to get home?
Well, I think our point here is to show with Kathleen, here is an African-American businesswoman in Paris who has her life there. She's an average person. Sorry, Kathleen, you're more than average, but for our purposes here, you're an average person. Yes. Just to show that, just to put to bed the promulgation of Americans living outside the United States that they must be doing something nefarious because they're living outside the U.S., or they must be extremely wealthy or avoiding taxes, etc. And Kathleen is certainly not an anomaly. She's a perfect example of who we are. We're just average people. Some are rich, some are not, some are everything in between, just trying to live a life in their country of residence. But this citizenship-based taxation does not allow Americans overseas to live a normal life. And last point, Kathleen is a perfect example of someone who has been invested her time in the United States in getting people to vote, doing her patriotic duty that most homeland Americans don't even do. So that's another thing to put down, to rest, that Americans who live overseas are not, quote unquote, patriotic to America. And
Yeah,
I think this is what highlighting it.
Keith, I think that's a beautiful summary. And yeah, and Kathleen has done more than I have. I live in the U.S. I have not volunteered as much as she has. That's a fact. And amazing. So I think we've hopefully, now, of course, you have style. I don't think we dispelled that. You're drinking champagne on your birthday in France and you have style, but that shouldn't be a crime, right? And I think that's the way we are. The FBAR form that you mentioned before, it's a criminal crime. It says it goes to the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. So the assumption is you're criminal because you have a bank account in France.
But you know, and I'm going to end on this. If they would just change the way that they process it, so that when you have bank accounts in the country that you're living in, then it's not a crime, then it's perfectly normal. It's perfectly normal to have a bank account in the country you're living in. It's perfectly normal that you have a pension in the country of the company you were working for. And that is something which doesn't seem to even register on the radar. And that would be so simple to change. So the American who's living in the United States and working in the United States and only has a bank account, okay. But people who are living abroad, who've been living abroad for 20 years, it's normal that they have a bank account abroad. It makes sense.
You know, Kathleen, you make a really, really practical point. You know, how can anybody disagree with that? What you're saying is that your bank accounts, your pensions, your financial activities in any way, shape, or form are local to you. They're not foreign. So why should they be treated through the lens of being foreign and therefore a presumptive form of tax evasion? And I can tell you that within the last 10 years, on several occasions, the Treasury has considered whether Americans abroad should be exempt from the FBAR requirements. And they considered whether in the context of FATCA there should be a same country exemption. And in both cases, they have completely rejected. They have completely, deliberately, knowingly rejected the common sense solution that you're proposing. Now, I mention that for two reasons. One, to make it clear that there is no doubt the Treasury is completely aware of the hardships being imposed on you and other Americans abroad. Completely aware. So this is, to use one of their words, willful. Yeah. Second point I would make is this, that Treasury has the jurisdiction, and in fact, I, along with a couple other people, Karen Alpert and Laura Snyder, had an essay on this published in Tax Notes in October. Treasury has the jurisdiction, without Congress, to make a number of changes to the regulations that really drive this thing, that could make this go away. But so far, they have not done that. So although one should never give up on a legislative fix, there is no doubt that Treasury has the jurisdiction, and I think the knowledge of what's going on to fix this. And I think that's an important point to make as we come to the end of this discussion. I no longer believe that this is a situation where, well, people just don't know what's going on. Yeah. The American people don't know what's going on. Congress doesn't know what's going on. Treasury knows completely what's going on. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. And Treasury should be making the change. Now, you're a political activist. You're a political activist. So you need to get on the phone to the Biden transition people and say that one of your first acts as president, President-elect Biden, should be to direct the Treasury of the Secretary, presumably Janet Yellen, to understand and make these changes. We are that close to being able to do it. That's how it can be done. And since you've been back to America, doing this political lobbying, I would encourage you that that would be a great avenue to apply your formidable effort.
All I can do is write.
As
I
you know,
haven't
well,
been to the United States in a while.
well, this is what we can say about, and I think Keith has talked to Commissioner Reddick, and it's because the commissioner of the IRS has said this, and he's mentioned this, that, you know, people are tired of being chumps. And that's the point I would want to make the Treasury. Guys, you can do it your way. You're making your life completely
You
hellish.
used the word chumps. When Charles Reddick was in private practice, I remember reading an article written by him. I think it was titled,
Oh, okay. You told me about it then. Okay.
Why All the Trouble with FBAR or something like that. And this is one of the points that he himself made. He said, people should not be made to feel like chumps for complying with this system. And, you know, Kathleen complied with the whole thing, with the whole 9 yards. What was the result? Her financial life has been destroyed. And my guess is that she's going to get, accept the idea that she has to renounce her citizenship.
And
So what's happening is the people who comply
shameful.
are the ones who have to renounce.
Right.
Yes.
Unbelievable.
Right. Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Right. I will tell you that there's likely someone in Kathleen, I don't know how many apartments are in your building. If it's a big size, there's probably going to be another American who didn't comply. It isn't even thinking about it. Isn't worried about it. They're like, yeah, I'm just not going to bother doing it. And then I'm not worried about it. But there you are doing the right thing. And now thinking, I guess
Because I'm one
you
of those
did such a right thing. You have to renounce your citizenship.
People. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So now,
And Anthony,
go ahead.
Anthony, if I may, just to add, and maybe you're going to talk about this. I think what John was talking about is a good segue in talking about the new organization that's been
that's
founded.
kind of and I think that's what we want to. I think that our focus is a fix is most likely going to come from Treasury, because Congress doesn't have an understanding. They simply don't have an understanding or care.
But Congress doesn't even read the bills that
they have no clue what it is. They don't even. Congress hasn't written a bill in probably 20 years. It's all cut and paste from lobbyists, and it goes in there. So
Anthony,
they don't know what's in there.
Can I just add something to the legislative thing? You know, we've been talking about really a collage of different pieces of legislation, some of which are in the tax code, some of which are in other things that are causing the problems. But you might find it interesting, your listeners might find it interesting to know that I think every single one of these pieces of legislation over the last decade or so have come in as attachments to pieces of legislation as revenue offset provisions.
Yes.
They were never the point of the legislation. They were always put in as some add-on. That's what FATCA was, by the way. It was a revenue offset provision for the HIRE Act, hiring incentives to restore employment. Who can disagree with that? And they put FATCA in. And this is why I think that the situation to get Treasury on top of this and basically say the gig is up, we understand exactly what's going on, and we know that you understand, and no hiding, and you can change this stuff. This is why this is so important.
Treasury's got to change. They can't manage these cases themselves. They have rules they can't possibly enforce, and a steady growing of constituency that is growing, but nothing but contempt for the United States government and its brutal indifference on how it imposes its horrific size and scope, terrorizing people and destroying opportunities, around the world.
They destroy lives.
Right.
They destroy lives. And by the way, as I think we've said before on these discussions, Anthony, it's not that they don't care. It's that they don't care that they don't care.
There you go. Right. Yeah, that's right. That's how deep it is. So, guys, we want to point people. There is some action we are taking. We have a great group going on. Keith and John have been part of a group that started an organization to help bipartisan. Whatever your party is, it doesn't matter. We all could come together to say this is insane and serves no one. Ruining people.
We could say it's nonpartisan.
There you go. Right.
Nonpartisan.
We're just about common sense.
Yeah.
So we're about that. So it's seatnow.org, SEAT now.org. Go there, get involved. We're pushing for some real fixes here that, hopefully make some lives better for people. In the meantime, and this is something that we constantly say, if you're worried about your own personal situation, get one-on-one advice. Everything is different. We hear people who think that assume worst case, there might be something that really saves you. John does this a lot. He's able to get people solutions that fit for them. So
Yeah.
you might be right now thinking, oh my God, this is the end of me. I'm just not going to bother complying. I'm just going to do my own thing. What we still advise you is still contact someone. Contact more than one. There's no situation.
Exactly. And Anthony, if I may add to that, well, just 2 points. Just for people to know, SEAT, S-E-A-T, stands for Stop Extraterritorial American Taxation. So that's the acronym SEATnow.org. The other thing is, and just to add on to what you said, absolutely, it's important to get advice, and it's important to not do it in haste. A holistic approach needs to be taken, and to gather as much information as possible before you take a decision, whatever that decision may be.
Right. Don't file something. If you're going to file something, know everything that you're going to be following. You just don't want to do, okay, I'll just do this little bit and then work on it, because the thing that you might have done.
And know what the risks are and know what the ramifications are depending on the decision you take, and weigh those in making your final decision.
Yeah, that sounds great. Well, guys, I want to thank you for joining me on this one. I think we added the story, a story that we need to. Kathleen, thank you so much. And thank you so much for your efforts in trying to make America a little bit better here, and in volunteering, doing far more than I have. And thank you so much for sharing your story. And thank you for sharing this on your birthday too. And I'll let you get to another glass of champagne.
Thank you very much.
And that shrimp that's waiting for you. So
happy birthday. Happy birthday.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Take care.
All right. Thanks for watching, everybody.
Thank you.